This is the Cynical Centrist podcast, episode number 8 for July 13th, 2019. I am the Cynical Centrist. Before I begin, I do want to give a shout out and a congratulations to the U.S. women's national soccer team. They have retained their championship by defeating France, the hosts France in the quarterfinals, England in the semifinals, and the Netherlands in the finals. And yes, they did retain their championship. That was pretty awesome. And just wanted to give a shout out and a congratulations to them. We have a ton of election analysis to get to, including my new 6-point bubble watch system. And I wanted to talk about it on this podcast. And it's just going to be very quick. And also, as voted on by people on Twitter, and quite a few of you, about 700, we are going to look at Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump. And I'm actually going to do a full, unbiased analysis on this. So let's get started with some of the election analysis here, all right? You might have noticed on Twitter that I created something called a bubble watch. Now, I got this off of the college basketball ESPN's bubble watch, and I wanted to call it bubble watch because it sounds familiar. Now, obviously, I'm going to give shout out to ESPN for the term, but to me, politics is a lot like a sport. And that's how I want to see this as the Democratic candidates prepare to make their way towards the September debates. Now, I got a lot of complaints over like who I would put in and who I would put out and who I thought was on the bubble versus who should be in versus other stuff. So I had made a more discreet 6-point system. And I know a lot of you are asking me, what do you mean by this? And I kind of described it on Twitter, but in case you were a little confused still, basically the way that I built this is in order for a candidate to get to the debate, they will have to get 6 points. And they are divided into 2 categories. Now, as the Democrats say, you have to get 130,000 donors. And donors is something that they can definitely control, so I made that count only 2 points. 1 point per 65,000 donors. Also, it's very easy to get a bunch of donors, but it's the polls that matter. And the polls is a little something that is a little bit more out of their control, I should say. So I weighted it a little bit higher. Now, they needed 4 polls at 2% or higher and a DNC-approved poll outlet. And so that would be 1 point per. So 4 plus 2 makes 6. As it stands right now, 6 points will give you a lock. 4 to 5 I would put in the should be in category. 2 to 3 is going to be on the bubble, and 1 and under is in the work to do category. This basically means that you probably need about 2 to 3 points right now. You can get that in any combination of having all your donors or having 1 poll and half your donors and so on. So about 2 to 3 points if you want any hope at all of reaching the September debates. And there are only a handful of these candidates, less than half actually, who qualify for that. And I'm going to get to that right now. So we have 5 people that have already achieved those 6 points. They are what I call the locks. They have already punched their ticket into the September debates, and those are Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. All qualify for September right now. We have 2 sitting at 5 points, which basically means that they can pretty much punch their ticket in, but they still need to do one more thing to get in, and that is Beto O'Rourke. He just needs 1 more 2% in a DNC-approved poll, and Cory Booker, who still needs, I believe, 20,000 donors as of July 1st. Now, this is as of the time of this recording, which is July the 13th. Now, anything could happen between now and the time that you listen, but yes, they currently have 5 points. At 4 points, we have Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar has not hit either metric yet, but has gotten 3 polls at 2% and has about, I think, 100,000 donors as of April, and she hasn't reported and claimed that she has 130,000 yet, but it's looking like it very likely that she is going to make the September debates herself. Now, on the bubble, there are 2 candidates at 3 points apiece. Julian Castro and Andrew Yang, they both hit their 130,000 donors, but as of right now, as of this recording, they have only gotten 1 of the 4 required 2%. Now, in the case of Andrew Yang, he just got his, I believe, on Thursday. Julian Castro got his early on, and I'm actually a little surprised he hasn't gotten a 2% since then, but that is where they stand as of right now. There's nobody at 2 points, so we're going to go to the 1 point end, and we have 5 candidates there. They are Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, Jay Inslee, Mike Gravel, which congratulations, he had just gotten his 65,000th donor last night, and Marianne Williamson. Now, look, there were a few of my friends who listen to my podcast and had asked me the question why I am so easy on Marianne Williamson, why I'm so soft on her. And, well, like I said, first impressions were a big thing for me, and I first saw her at the Poor People's Campaign. Now, like I said before, I didn't instantly fall in love with her, but I thought to myself, yeah, she could make some serious waves in debates with that kind of passion. Now, she did lack a lot of substance, but I will say that I feel like that she is by and far one of the most passionate candidates in this debate, and she has a very passionate following. It's kind of a slightly smaller scale Andrew Yang. I get that she has like 10 times more followers on Twitter, but as far as the number of people who would vote for her, she has, I think, about half the followers that Yang does, or half the people that are cheering for her that Yang does. And she is also an outsider candidate, and to be honest, I can respect that. I mean, I can respect someone who actually wants to go out there and become president because they want to change things. Now, as for some of her policies, like wanting to fight Trump with love and wanting to create a Department of Peace, well, you see, that's kind of where my like for her stops a little bit, just because I feel like a lot of those issues are just not very practical. That being said, I still do see her as a dark horse in a way, and especially if Oprah, which I know she is friends with Oprah Winfrey, ever decides to endorse her. I mean, if she decides to endorse her, that's her ticket to September right away, at the very least, if not into being a top-tier candidate. The only reason I can find for voting for Marianne Williamson is she would definitely be the most interesting candidate to watch in a debate against Trump one-on-one. And that includes Andrew Yang in that sense, because you know what Andrew Yang is going to say, you know what Donald Trump's going to say. Actually, those kind of debates are going to be a little boring in a way, because you kind of already know, unless Andrew Yang really brings the fight to Trump. Now, with Marianne Williamson, you know she's going to bring the fight to Trump. Whether or not she brings the substance is beyond that, but you know it's going to be very entertaining. And I don't know, I actually kind of played the idea with a friend, and we just came up with all these crazy ideas that could happen during that debate. And it would actually be, honestly, it would be a license to print money. You would have to put that stuff on pay-per-view. But neither here nor there. Not going to talk about Marianne anymore. Let's talk about a guy who has been knocked out of the race. Well, he knocked himself out of the race pretty early, actually. Eric Swalwell. I guess I don't know if it's because of money reasons or if he just felt like he had no chance to win, but he dropped out of the race. And yeah, I had him ranked last place in the Poor People's Campaign Forum. He did an absolutely terrible job and was extremely boring. And he didn't really improve very well during the debates either. I didn't even have him in my top 10. I'm pretty sure he was close to the bottom half, but he was one of those guys that you would see on there that they all kind of looked the same. He stood out a little bit more because he was in the night 2 group, but he still got absolutely destroyed during those debates. And he was talking to Joe Biden saying he should pass the torch to a younger generation. And that was literally his only stance that people knew from him in the debates. So we started with 25. Well, 26. I mean, Richard Ojeda did drop out very early on. And now we are at 24. Or are we? Enter Tom Steyer, who literally the day after Swalwell dropped out, Steyer brought himself in. And he's another outsider candidate. He's a billionaire. But the difference between him and the other two outsider candidates, Yang and Williamson, is that he has a lot of money. And he was able to run a huge ad campaign announcing that he was going to run for president. Now, how effective this is going to be, actually, this would be really interesting to find out just how effective this would be compared to what Andrew Yang is doing with his grassroots movement. I'm actually really interested to see. Now, I don't think either one of them has a chance of winning, don't get me wrong. But it would be interesting to see who ends up surviving further. Is it money or is it people? And that's going to be something to look at. Now, with Eric Swalwell eliminated, that does leave one spot open for the second debates, if that is, CNN does decide to keep them in the same order. So basically that the same 20 people were expected to show up for the second debates. And we have 6 possible candidates that could take that spot. So it's a pretty good possibility that Tom Steyer is going to be that 20th person. The only other possibility that I can think of that could get in, possibly Steve Bullock, Mike Gravel. Now, I believe that Tom Steyer still needs 1% in 3 polls, but I think he can get that pretty easily, I think. Well, I guess it depends on what the cutoff date is, or maybe he is just waiting out for September, and that he thinks that he can pull off getting 2% by September and just leapfrog everybody. Now, as far as who I think is going to make the September debates, I do have, for sure, 7 candidates, I think, that are definitely going to make it. Now, 5 have already been locked in. I do think that O'Rourke and Cory Booker look like they have a good shot. And Amy Klobuchar has a pretty high shot, too. Andrew Yang and Julian Castro up in the air. And then there's a possibility, though not likely, of Tulsi Gabbard getting in, Tom Steyer, depending on how much money he actually puts into it. If he puts a lot of money into it and people actually kind of warm up to the guy really quickly, yeah, I can see him by August 26th getting all the requirements needed to just leapfrog everybody into the September debates. Other than that, I don't see any other candidates with much of a shot. Marianne Williamson is going to be facing a much more uphill battle than her outsider counterpart, Andrew Yang, and getting 2% in the polls, and she hasn't even hit her 130,000 unique donors yet. So there's also that. And with so much talk about the Democrat primaries, I know a lot of people would be asking, well, what about the Republican primaries? Apparently, that actually used to be a thing where the incumbent president used to have to actually defend his crown. That happened, I think the last time that it has happened seriously was the days of George H.W. Bush in 92, actually. And it's pretty interesting to think about that even as unpopular as Donald Trump is, there are no serious challengers to Donald Trump. And that's actually kind of surprising. There is one challenger, Bill Weld, but a lot of people saw him as the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party 4 years ago, so they don't really see him as a serious Republican candidate anyway. So barring some sort of issue that removes Trump from office, whether it be by illness, God forbid, or being impeached and then removed somehow by the Senate by some, in my opinion, the only way that he could be impeached is if Mike Pence turns against him and decides he wants to be president, so he stages some kind of coup with a bunch of Republican senators to remove him from office. Outside of that, though, I just don't see it. Pretty much Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. That's all I'm going to say regarding the Republican primary, and that's the only time I'm even going to mention the Republican primary in this, because we can pretty much assume Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. There's not going to be many people that will be voting in Bill Weld, especially when I'm pretty sure anyone who follows Republican politics would view him as sort of a turncoat for siding with the Libertarian Party as the vice presidential nominee. So I'm just letting you all know that I plan on making some upgrades to this podcast, and one of those upgrades happens to be what I'm going to do regarding these breaks. Originally, one of my biggest complaints regarding the podcast was that it was too long, which is really interesting because I actually used to be on a podcast a while back that would go 3-4 hours long per episode. So being 30 to 40 minutes long, I guess that's the reason why I'm not doing that podcast anymore, right? So I just find that interesting that most people really could only listen for up to 10 to 15 minutes at a time. So I set up these breaks every 15 minutes, and I had 15 minutes, break, 15 minutes, break, and then like 5 minutes or so to wrap things up. Well, instead, I'm going to start using timestamps from this episode. So that's going to be one of the upgrades that you'll see. So with the addition of timestamps, I am going to put a poll up if you think that I should continue using the breaks or if they've become outdated. So I will have that poll up following The podcast, I want to do that on Sunday, so that will be tomorrow. So yeah, that's one of the upgrades I plan on doing. Another thing I plan on doing is a voiceover for the introduction and trying to upgrade the intro a little better. So that's another thing. And before we get to the meat and potatoes of this segment, I do have a few shout outs. So first off, the opening song, audionautics.com, thousands of songs for your podcast or any other things like advertisements. Go check it out, audionautics.com. Also, Pulsar Radio, spinning new alternative indie rock, punk, metal, hardcore, and more, and he talks about anime, wrestling, hockey, nerd culture, and more. Now on twice a week, Wednesdays from 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 to midnight Eastern, and Fridays, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Tune in at radiovegas.rocks. You can go follow him at Pulsar Smash and download the free radiovegas.rocks app that's available for iPhone and Android. Also, you can follow me at Cynical Centrist, and now you can catch me on YouTube as well. Go check that out. You can follow me at Cynical Centrist, click on the YouTube link, and subscribe, and click on the bell icon to be notified. And don't forget, if I'm not pissing you off, I'm not doing my job. So I put up a poll a few days ago, and I had 4 candidates in mind that I wanted to analyze how they would do against Donald Trump. The options were Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, and Marianne Williamson. And, well, no real surprise here, about 80% of the almost 1,000 people that took the poll chose Andrew Yang, which in some ways kind of surprised me, but at the same time, not really, because I know I have a lot of Andrew Yang fans, and there aren't too many general election analyses on Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump, because a lot of people think that there's this media blackout of Andrew Yang and you never see how he's doing in general elections. Well, so be it. Let's talk Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump. Now, when I first did research for this, a couple things were made clear to me, especially being someone who is, admittedly, a supporter of Andrew Yang, but not necessarily 100% biased towards him. The first is that this is not going to be the typical red versus blue matchup. You're going to have some states, not necessarily going to flip, but they do have the potential to be the new battlegrounds, and I will get to these in a bit. Now, there are going to be some that favor Trump and some that favor Yang. There are also some states that people will find to be battleground states that likely will not be. Second, despite what Yang supporters might think and what the Yang Gang might think, this is actually not going to be a cakewalk for Andrew Yang. Now, a lot of people think that, and I should say a lot of Yang Gang supporters, think that as soon as Andrew Yang wins the primary, the general election is going to be a cakewalk for him. And on the surface, it does seem like it. I mean, the odds makers are putting Andrew Yang at a 65% chance to win right now, and I think the next best one is Elizabeth Warren at like 51%, and then Kamala Harris a little under 50%. So everyone else is basically either a toss-up or an underdog except for Andrew Yang. However, here's something that the odds makers won't tell you, and that is that we have an election based on states and electoral votes. And it's not necessarily the popular vote, hello 2016, that wins the election. It is the electoral vote. And if you base this on states and where Trump has a chance and where Yang has a chance, this is where it's not going to be as easy of a cakewalk for Andrew Yang. He's still going to have to win those swing states. It is by far not going to be a cakewalk for anyone to face Donald Trump, especially with him going to start off with an almost 2-to-1 money advantage over whoever the Democratic nominee is. Now, to do this analysis, as I told you, there's not much reliable information on Yang versus Trump. There are a few polls out there, but they're not very reliable, and they are currently relying on Yang's current how people see him and how many people actually know him. And there are still a lot of people that do not know this guy. So when they do Yang versus Trump, obviously he's going to fall behind by double digits, which I think there was one poll. I think the best that he's done in one poll is losing to Trump by 9 right now, which can change over time depending on how much people know him. So to do this properly, the best way that I could, I followed this based on many metrics and kind of created some kind of an algorithm, some kind of formula. I don't really want to talk about the details because I'll be here forever if I do. But I followed it based on gender, racial, and ethnic demographics, how people voted in the previous 2 elections, the reasons why people voted for Trump versus Clinton based on state, and how Yang is doing in the primaries, and also Trump's approval rating in each state currently. Now, let's talk about Andrew Yang, the candidate himself, and let's talk about his advantages and disadvantages before we get to some of these toss-up states. And we're going to start with the advantages. So the big advantage I feel like Andrew Yang has is the working class. And I say that because of his UBI plan. Now, a lot of people, who doesn't like free money, right? So the idea of $1,000 a month for every American would pretty much keep the working class feeling a little bit safe. Now, a lot of this is going to depend on, how the working class thinks that $1,000 a month is not going to be able to help them afford certain things. But for those who want to live a very modest life and have their house paid off, yeah, $1,000 a month, they could retire early if they wanted to. Second big advantage that Andrew Yang would have is he would likely get the lion's share of the vote from the fastest growing ethnic racial demographic in the United States right now, Asian Americans. The reason is simple. He's an Asian American himself. Now, do I think that he's going to be able to pick up 90% of the Asian vote the way that Obama picked up 95% of the black vote? I'm not quite sure, but I could see him picking up an above average amount of Asian votes. I would say 85, maybe 90%, depending on how people warm up to his ideas. But I do think that he's going to get disproportionately the amount of Asian voters, and that's going to put him at a serious advantage over Trump. The third major advantage Andrew Yang has is he is the type of Democrat who is managing to catch the former Trump voter. And you can see that with a lot of his YouTube videos or a lot of other people's YouTube videos about Andrew Yang. And you can see a lot of conservatives and moderates who voted for Trump because they thought that he was going to bring about change, and they were willing to put the button on the annoying orange and be like, okay, I'll give this guy a shot. Now they're giving that to Andrew Yang because they feel like Donald Trump has failed them in a way. Would they do the same for someone who's a little bit further left, like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? Well, they might have done it for Bernie Sanders in 2016 simply because he was the not Hillary vote, but it's pretty clear now with more choice that these types of voters, the ones that are willing to try anything new, are actually willing to try something completely new, and especially someone who's a little bit more comfortable with their beliefs. And that's why I think Andrew Yang can pick up a lot of that independent vote that did vote for Trump, only because, and not because of racism or anything like that, but because they really thought that Donald Trump would bring about that change, and they have a huge dislike for the establishment, which is why they just could not find themselves voting for Hillary Clinton. Now for his main disadvantages. The first one, front and center, is he does not do very well against voters 55 and over. And I think a big reason for that is because his ideas are a little too radical. Now, voters that are 55 and over kind of disproportionately make up a lot of the votes that decide basically elections in general, which is the reason why, even though there are more registered Democrats, Republicans do have this tendency to win elections easier. And this is going to hurt Andrew Yang badly in one state in particular, which, like I said, I will get to that in a little bit. The second disadvantage, now, there was this one study that came out that looked at the top 10 candidates at the time, and Andrew Yang is one of them. I think he was 8th at the time. And they did a little hexagon map that showed each ethnicity and gender, there's 6 of them, I believe, white, black, and other, and showed how favorable versus how unfavorable they were compared to their current polling. And for Andrew Yang, he was very much favored amongst other men, other women, and black men. He also had a slight increase in favorability rating for white men as well, but it wasn't as high as a lot of people thought. And then with black women, he had a slight disfavorability, but with white women, oh my God. I mean, there was like almost, that was like, it couldn't get any more negative than that. And I had to put white women as number 2 on his disadvantages because these are the type of people. Now, I'm not going to say that this will cause white women to vote for Trump, but I do think that you could see a case where a lot of the white women end up staying home because they don't like either candidate. And a second reason is because I've been seeing on Twitter how a lot of people won't vote for Andrew Yang because he's ugly or because they don't like the way that he looks or he doesn't look presidential to a lot of those women. Now, don't look at me. That's just what I've been noticing. Now, do I think that means that white women will actually vote for Trump against Yang in 2020? Like more of them will vote for Trump versus Yang? Stranger things have happened. So I'm not going to say that it's going to be completely out of the realm of possibility. I do think that it's going to be a little closer, definitely a little closer than Clinton versus Trump. Actually, a lot closer. But I do think Yang will get a slight edge there, but I think that a good significant portion of that vote is going to be taken away from him and possibly move to Trump, or the white woman vote would just stay home for that one. And finally, the third big disadvantage, and that is he is not very popular with social justice progressives. Now, with economic progressives, he's doing great. And it seems like progressives fall into one of those two camps, or both. But with economic progressives, he's been doing great. With what they call the social justice warrior, not so much. I think a lot of that I have already mentioned on the Andrew Yang episode is due to how he looks. But I do think that some of it is because his policies are too far out for a lot of these social justice warriors to accept. Also, Andrew Yang himself has come out on Twitter and has said that he does not want to play identity politics no matter how tempting, and that pisses off a lot of people on that side as well. So if it comes down to Trump versus Yang, will they vote Green Party or will they just stay home? I just don't see it. I mean, I guess some of them will just go ahead and hold their nose, I feel like, and vote for Andrew Yang. But I think that you would see a significant amount of them vote Green Party or just stay home in that sense. So now let's talk about the results, what I think will likely happen. And I'm going to start with the safe states for each of these candidates. These are the states that I believe either Yang or Trump will win by double digits. And I'm going to start on Trump's side. I have 110 safe electoral votes for Donald Trump. The states of Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of Nebraska except for the 2nd District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia. Now, 2 states in particular there that I know a lot of people are surprised I put down as safe are Indiana and Missouri because they're normally likely GOP, but not entirely GOP. And I think this one, they will be pretty safely in the GOP column this time around. Indiana because Mike Pence, obviously. And Missouri because I feel like that they are moving towards Republicans. So I can see them being a very safe and solid red state. Now for Andrew Yang, I have 168 safe electoral votes, putting him ahead of Trump right now in the safe column, 168 to 110. The states I got for him, Washington, California, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Did I say Illinois? Well, if I didn't, I'm going to add Illinois to that as well. 168 electoral votes there. No real surprises on that one, except for there is one, maybe 2 states that I left out and I put into the likely column. And I'm going to start there. But first, let's talk about Donald Trump's 74 likely electoral votes. So I have South Carolina, no real surprise there. I have North Carolina on the likely end, and I say that because I feel like that there isn't enough of a demographic there for Yang to win. And I know a lot of people think that it could possibly be a toss-up, but I just don't see it. Here's a surprise for you all. I put Florida in the likely column. I think that Trump will win this one by 5 or 6. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I believe that there is enough senior voters there, and Andrew Yang does not really respond to senior voters very well, if you've been noticing his primary polls. So as it looks right now, this could obviously change, and Yang could possibly take Florida. I don't know. But based on the demographics, I see Trump easily taking Florida with maybe a too early to call early on, but he would eventually take the state of Florida. Ohio as well, I put Ohio down. But I think with a lot of candidates, with the exception of maybe Joe Biden, that Trump is expected to take Ohio just because they've been slowly turning more red over time. And I put down Montana in the likely end, and a lot of people would say this is a solid GOP. I know it's just 3 electoral votes, but I feel like Montana is a little bit more independent-minded than most other GOP states, and you could see them kind of warming up to Andrew Yang's ideas a little bit. So I actually originally wanted to put Montana as a lean GOP, possibly even a toss-up, but I felt like that was a little bit too out of left field. So there you go, 74 electoral votes for Trump, putting him at 184 right now after the likelies. Let's move on to 38 likely electoral votes for Andrew Yang. The states I have him as a likely is Connecticut, though I think it's going to be something like he'll win by 8 or 9. I don't see him. I don't know. There's just the demographics there are just showing me that it's possible that Trump could make it competitive sort of there. Maine, except for Maine's 2nd district, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Minnesota, New Mexico, no surprise there. Oregon, no real surprise there. I know they've been sort of, kind of going back and forth in turning red versus turning blue, but I think that Yang will put a solid win there. And Nevada, which a lot of people think is still a toss-up, but I think he will solidly win the state of Nevada. So that would put Andrew Yang at 206 to 184 for Trump, with 148 electoral votes left to look at. Now I'm going to move on to Trump's 59 lean votes, 38 of them being in the state of Texas. No surprise. It is a lean vote. I think it'll lean red and will likely continue to lean red probably through 2024. Beyond that, though, it's anyone's guess. I put Arizona down, 11 electoral votes. No surprise there. Same with the other analysts. Iowa, same with the other analysts. And also, I feel like Andrew Yang isn't polling very well in Iowa either compared to the other states. So that's why I kind of kept that one as lean red. Alaska, for the same reasons as Montana, and also they have a higher Asian population there. I would not be surprised. I guess I would be slightly surprised if Andrew Yang turned Alaska blue. Now, again, I know, just 3 electoral votes. What does it matter? But it's something to think about there. And finally, Nebraska District 2, just like what all the analysts are saying. So that would put Donald Trump at 243 electoral votes right now. Now I'm going to go to Yang's leans that I have. I have 259 total, so that makes 53 leans for Andrew Yang. The states I have for him on a blue lean are Maine District 2, New Hampshire, Virginia, Colorado, and I feel like Wisconsin and Michigan are not going to be toss-ups. I actually do think that he's been spending a significant amount of time with the Midwest, and I do feel like the Midwest will open up to his ideas, and that's the reason why I'm going to give Andrew Yang Wisconsin and Michigan. That leaves 2 states with 36 toss-up votes. The first one, no surprise, is Pennsylvania. Most analysts are saying, so goes Pennsylvania, so goes the election. The second one, going to be a little bit of a surprise for you all, but I'm going to make a bold prediction here, that there will be a toss-up in the state of Georgia. And the reason why I say that is because it is a really big, Atlanta's a really big tech city right now. It's definitely considered the Silicon Valley of the South. There is a higher than normal Asian population there as well. And they do have people that are a little bit more independent-minded than the average Southerner. So I can see, it's a possibility if Andrew Yang is to take any state in the South from Donald Trump, any one of them, and I don't count Virginia as a Southern state. If he were to take any state from the South, I could see it being Georgia. Now, I'm actually going to talk about what the two states that I put down. Now, I have 259, 243 for Yang and Trump. Of these two states, Yang just has to win one. And I have Donald Trump just barely winning in Georgia. And I have Andrew Yang just barely beating in Pennsylvania. And if it goes either way, Yang still wins. So I have Yang winning narrowly. But to think that it's going to be as easy as everyone thinks that it is for Andrew Yang, after doing my analysis and seeing what the demographics are like and seeing what the playing field is for Andrew Yang, and this is just assuming that everything goes well in the debates. I mean, things could go wrong as well. You could see Republicans easily counter Andrew Yang's ideas and easily turn on him. So don't think that just because he's able to unite Republicans now doesn't mean that they're going to turn against him in the general election. You have to think about that for a second, because a lot of people still see this UBI idea not as a moderate or centrist position to the overwhelming problems of automation, but as a form of socialism. And you better believe that Fox News is going to keep talking about that endlessly. So my final prediction is Andrew Yang 279, Donald Trump 259, or if it's the other way around and Trump wins Pennsylvania and Andrew Yang wins Georgia, then it will be Yang 275, Trump 263. Either way, I think Andrew Yang does have the edge here. Now, normally I would go to a break, but for this one time, I'm actually going to test out if people use the timestamps or not. And I'm just going to go straight to this one final, because this would only take like 2 minutes to talk about, guys. And I just wanted to talk about this. I thought this was funny. And like I said, I've been sick for the last few days, so I haven't been able to look at what's on the news. But it seems like the most popular thing that is on the news right now is a petition or some kind of meetup of 300,000 people planning to storm Area 51 to get in contact with aliens or something. Look, guys, don't get yourselves killed, will you? What is wrong with you all? Like, seriously. I swear, the human race never ceases to amaze me. Sometimes the way that people act, I'm surprised if aliens ever contact us at all. Think about it for a second. Between what we've seen and what I've talked about here on the podcast, and then what I see from YouTubers like, and I'm not really shouting this guy out, but there's a guy that I saw on YouTube who every week he does this one dumb stunt off a microwave or into barbed wire or something like that, like pro wrestling moves. And everyone finds this entertaining. And then if you remember my Cynicism of Life video last week, we were talking about racist female clowns that do porn and people buying gamer girl bathwater from some Instagram model. And knowing all this, I have to think to myself, if I were an alien race that managed to build spacecraft that possibly traveled enough years at slower than light speed to get to Earth and get in contact with us, or possibly traveled using spacecraft that is faster than light speed or through wormholes, if I were that intelligent of a life form, would I really want to hang out with people like this? Would I really want to get into contact with people like that? That's something to think about, and I will see you all next week for another episode of The Cynical Centrist. You can catch me on social media at Cynic Centrist, and also on Podbean, cynicalcentrist.podbean.com. After some consideration and talking with fans, I have decided to stay on Podbean for my fans. But you can now also catch me on YouTube. Just go to my Twitter link, click on the YouTube link, and it will take you to the Cynical Centrist podcast on YouTube. And remember, if I'm not pissing you off, I'm not doing my job. Bye, everyone.